a lot of the time the hardest part about staying productive is like just getting into the studio and just like starting working, you know. Ambition trumps talent every time. And I think that's totally true because, you know, a lot of people that are like quote unquote talented, like they're trying to make like the perfect thing. And if it's not perfect, they don't want to make it. They don't want to be associated with it. But it's like there's a lot more to be said for just like consistency.
Thanks for taking some time and having a chat. Super stoked to have you. Definitely want to dig into some of your experience around like the world of being a creative and like specifically your music journey. So it's probably as good a place as any to start. Um,
Totally.
yeah, why don't you tell me how like what your journey into the world of studio recording and music production looked like, and just tell me a bit about your path.
Like how did I get into it and that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
man. Yeah, totally. Like, why did you start, and then how did you end up going down that path?
Okay. Well, yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. And yeah, man, I guess, I mean, I started out just like, I don't know, just really liking hip hop music and like the culture and, you know, like writing graffiti and, um, you know, I got kind of tired of like being paranoid about cops all the time. So I moved into music from there just because I realized like I could get the same sort of creative outlet satisfaction from that and not have to worry about like the legal aspect of it as much. So I started like DJing, and then like from there I was like realizing I was kind of more about the beats than I was about like DJ tricks and that kind of thing and scratching and juggling and that kind of thing. So then from there, you know, I was still living with my parents and was working full time. So I had like, you know, few grand saved up just in the bank. And yeah, like started doing my research into like how do you make beats? Like how does this thing happen? Like I would always listen to them and I'd be like, okay, like I feel like I can hear like how these things are being constructed, but like how you actually do the construction was like what I started researching. So I got this book called, this is like before the internet was like really sort of what it is today. You know, it was like a little bit more random and like it was harder to find certain information back then.
Pre
So I
YouTube.
got this, oh, well, yeah, I think it was pre YouTube, yeah. And so I got this book called Beat Tips by this dude named like Saeed, I think, and he lives in, I think he's from New York. And I think I heard about that like through the internet, but the internet was like, read this book instead of just like, here's the information, you know? So I got the book and I started reading about it, and I learned that like one of my main inspirations, DJ Premier, that his setup is the sampler called like an S950, and he had an MPC 60, and basically this book was just telling me like get this specific gear, and I was like, well, cool. Like DJ Premier's like my idol, like him and Pete Rock were probably like my two top influences at the time, probably like them and Madlib, but um anyway, so I just like took his advice and I like started looking for the gear and got the gear and just sort of dove in, man. Like I just sort of basically would like listen to beats, and like once I figured out how to actually like make a 4 bar sequence, I just like started listening to my favorite beats and like figuring out how they sort of structured like the overall structure, I guess, of like the beat, you know. And yeah, man, just sort of went from there and you know, just like kept making beats. And then, I mean, originally I started making beats because like me and my friends would just like do these stupid stoned like freestyle sessions, like in the kitchen with like a stupid little like computer mic, you know, and we would be like downloading beats from like Napster and stuff. And I remember we'd always be like, oh, like, wouldn't it be so cool if like we could use our own beats one day if we like made our own beats? And it just seemed like such like a far away type uh thing. Like it just seemed like so unachievable at the time. And then like once I started realizing like, I mean, people do this, I could do it. Like if someone does it, that means I could probably do it. So I just started, yeah, man, doing the research and, you know, like back up to speed. Like I got the gear and yeah, and then like started making songs with my friends. And yeah, man, I just like I felt like as soon as I started making beats and as soon as I started like got the process down, I was like, this is me, like this is like my calling, like this is like what I want to do in life. I mean, like it just gave me so much like fulfillment, you know, and like sampling old records and um, just like finding little pieces of like already existing songs that could just be like looped over and over again, and like you would just never get sick of that. Like as simple as like some of those beats sound, it's like it's hard to find a loop that way you can just listen to like 100 times in a row without getting tired of it, you know? So yeah, man, just like that whole process of like finding the sounds and then like putting them all together in a way to like make a new cohesive sort of tapestry is like it was just so kind of fascinating to me. And yeah, like so from there I just started making beats with my friends and making songs, and then sort of realized that like maybe I was taking it more seriously than some people, and that um I don't know, like I guess I just realized like it was something that I wanted to just like do on my own, and just started like making beats, and sort of eventually like sort of stopped making music with like the people I was making music with at the time, and then um yeah, just like I guess that's basically like the beginning of it. And then I was just like in my life I was like, I mean, did you just want me to like talk about like how I started making beats, or do you want me to talk about like my musical journey up until like
Yeah.
now?
No, talk about the journey, man. It's a
All
yeah,
right.
I'm sure it's a cool story.
Okay. Yeah, so I was just like, I don't know, I was living in Victoria when I first started making beats, like at my mom's house, and then I had like a bit of like a messy breakup, and just like I don't know, I think I decided like I wanted to move to Toronto and sort of pursue music more seriously. But then I moved to Toronto, and things weren't really happening as they should, and I was having trouble networking and sort of like getting out there. I was still making beats like all the time, but like they were just sort of sitting there. Um, I guess I was like posting them on SoundCloud every once in a while, and had a few things sort of go somewhat viral on there, but like um, I guess, and what I was doing at the time with my life, I didn't feel like fulfilled or satisfied. So my ex girlfriend at the time, actually, like she had moved down to LA, like the one that I mentioned the messy breakup with, and she was like, "Well, you should like go to school for music." And I guess I don't know, like in my life, like just I always had, I guess I had like more like parents that did like more traditional things with like their careers, and they never really like viewed anything artistic as like any sort of like legit career choice, you know? So I guess that's sort of like always in my head, like sort of worked against me in terms of like, um, is this something that you could actually like do for a job, you know? So I don't know. I guess I just started talking to her, and I was like, well, I'm still young, and like might as well just give it a shot. So I ended up like saving up a bunch of money, and I found like a community college in not in LA, but like just east in the Inland Empire, in this little place called Azusa, or I guess like Glendora, called Citrus College, and they had like an amazing like world class studio in there that like not a lot of people really knew about. And because it was a community college, they didn't really have like a big advertising budget. So the only way I heard about this college, and the only way I could like really afford music school, because like music schools, education in the States generally is just like crazy expensive. And for music schools, it was like I was seeing like these tuitions like over the course of your time at the school, you'd be like in debt, like, or I mean, in debt or spending, I mean, whichever applies, like six figures. And I was like, how are you gonna like have a creative graduate school and go into like an already really hard industry in debt like six figures? So I was like, that's just not doable for me, or it just doesn't seem, I guess, like prudent to like go that way. So when I found this like community college that was like a fraction of the price and had like world class facilities, and I figured like the most important thing was to like be in like where the action is, like in LA, you know. So that's like why I decided to go down there, and did the program. And I guess like the program, like for me as an international student, was like, I mean, cheaper than like most music schools like LA Recording School or any of the like in LA. But I was still spending like way more because I was an international student than any of like my peers in the program. So a lot of like my peers in the program were just sort of like doing it. A lot of people like weren't sure if this is like what they wanted to do with their life. But um, anyways, so I did the program, but I sort of realized like this program alone wasn't gonna like get me to where I wanted to be, you know. So this one day I had a friend in the program, and he let me know that he had like a link to get into the ASCAP conference for free if we just like volunteered, making like grab bags, like goodie bags for like all the attendants at the festival, or at, not the festival, at the conference. So when you go there, like you get a
What's the
bag,
conference?
the ASCAP conference. So it's like um, there's like performing rights organizations in the states, and like in Canada it's SOCAN, but in the states you have like CSAC, you got BMI, you got ASCAP, and these are organizations that are responsible for like basically collecting royalties for musicians. So when you put music out there, you register with either ASCAP, CSAC, or BMI, and I think there might be a couple others. Um, and so these organizations have like a huge impact in the music industry in terms of like getting creators paid and making sure that like, you know, if someone's playing their music, that like they're getting their fair share of what they should be getting, you know.
Hmm.
Well, I guess fair share is like, you know, depending on how you believe, but anyways, like at least you're getting paid, and these are organizations that are responsible for that. Like if your music gets played in like a restaurant, or I think now they're like online too, like if they're like your music gets used in like a YouTube video, things like that. Anyways, so ASCAP is one of the biggest ones, and they have like a conference every year, and they just, you know, they'll have like panels, they'll have like just events like concerts, and it's like I think the ticket at the time was like $300 to $400, which for me on like a sort of a stringent student budget was like not really in my budget, even though like looking back, I probably it would have been worth it to just pay it. But at the time I was thinking it was too expensive. But my buddy in the program was like, hey, like I got a link to get into the ASCAP conference for free if we just volunteer and like make these grab bags before, you know. And so basically I agreed, and he was like, oh, but we got to take a day off school to do it. I was like, why are we in this program? Like this is a much better opportunity than like a random day at school. So I don't even remember what we did that day at school, like obviously nothing important. So I was like, let's do it. And he was like, all right, cool. So we went and we volunteered. And basically, it was like we were stuck in a room with like a bunch of other people that wanted to get into the conference for free. And basically, it was like an assembly line. So there was like, you know, there would be like a pile of like this pamphlet, a pile of that pamphlet, a pile of like this good. And like and from each pile, like one item would have to go into the bag. So basically, you know, it was like an assembly line. So like the bag would reach you, you put like whatever you're standing in front of, one of them in the bag and pass it on, you know. And the
Conference
dude standing,
factory line.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And at some point, I don't know, like the dude next to me, like we just were like sort of cracking jokes and like talking about whatever. And at some point, one of the volunteer organizers came out and she was like, hey, I need like some people to like take some boxes down to my car for me. Like, do I have anybody that's willing to do that? And me and this dude, his name was Marcus. Uh, I don't know what he goes by now, but like big shout outs to this dude because I guess you'll find out in a bit. But he, you know, we were just like in the elevator, like holding these boxes going down to this woman's car, and we are just like making idle chit chat in the elevator. And he's like, "So what do you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, you know, I'm in school, like I'm in recording school. I'm learning how to like engineer and um, you know, learn how to like mix my music and all that. And you know, that's why I'm here." Like, sort of gave him the quick blurb on what I was and who I was and stuff. And he's like, "Oh, well, actually, like I work for like T-Boz's from TLC. T-Boz from TLC. I work for her production company, and we're actually looking for an engineer right now because like no one can really figure out how to mix her voice because like T-Boz has like a kind of really low register voice in terms of like where female voices go on like the frequency range, you know? So it's kind of tricky, I guess, for a lot of people to figure that out. Not that I was like an expert mixer at the time, but he was just like, we need someone. And I guess they were looking for an intern. And I guess we vibed. And so he was like, I guess this would work. So he was like, yeah, like, why don't you come by the studio after the conference today and like just come and chop it up? And, like if you guys are like feeling each other, or like if the vibe works, like, you could intern and get some experience in the actual industry. And obviously I was like, this is perfect. Like, this is like exactly what I was looking for, like going to the conference. So my buddy actually that like gave me the hookup to like get into the conference, he was like, I told him, and he's like, oh well, we got to go. And so I told Marcus, like, hey, is it cool if my buddy comes along, because he was my ride. So we both went to the studio. We walk in, and it was like we pull up to this like sort of janky looking spot in North Hollywood. And I mean, if you know the like the studio sort of landscape in LA, a lot of like world class studios are just like hiding in like behind like super janky looking settings. Like, you wouldn't even know, like, from looking at it from the outside, that it's like a dope studio. So we pull up to this like janky looking spot in North Hollywood. I hadn't really been to North Hollywood before. I was like, this looks kind of sketchy. But anyways, we went in, and we walked through, and like we get into the room that I guess like T-Boz was renting at the time. And first thing we see when we walk in is like, on the studio monitors, on top of the left studio monitor was a Grammy. On top of the right studio monitor was a Grammy. And I was like, oh, I guess, I think I'm in the right place. And so I guess we got along, and basically, yeah, like from there, basically like that one connection led to me meeting so many people. And um, I ended up working with like another producer. His name's Yanni. He's produced for like everybody, like Lil Wayne, Justin Bieber, The Game, like everybody. And he's sort of like not really known that well, like, I guess, in terms of like, he's really known that he's known super well, like, but I guess he's not like a Timbaland type, you know what I mean, known type dude, but he's worked with like anybody and everybody. And I guess like once they realized I was like more into like hip hop production and stuff, they sort of passed me off to Yanni. And then I interned with Yanni, and like Yanni really gave me like my real world experience, because like everything that I learned in school was like very technical and like sort of geared towards like very traditional recording things, like just like how to, like, what is EQ, and like what is the frequency range, and like a little bit of music theory and that kind of thing. But like in terms of like real techniques and like uh software and things like that were being used in like the industry, and specifically in like hip hop production and rap production, was like I didn't know any of that. And actually, with like one of my first sessions that I did with T-Boz, I remember, I think it was like Diddy's son. What's his name? Starts with a Q, maybe Quincy. I don't know. But anyways, he was my like the first person I ever recorded in that setting. And I remember he came out and he was like, basically like he recorded some stacks, like some vocal stacks. So like some harmonies, like you got like your main vocal, and then you got like your supporting harmonies like underneath. And this is my first time ever doing this type of work. And I was kind of just like, I guess I'll just do what I know, and just go from there. And the dude comes out of the booth. I know his name's not Quincy, but anyways, um, he came. It might be Quincy. So, anyways, besides the point. And so he comes out of the booth after he's done recording, and he's like, yeah, like they're a little bit like shifted, like timing wise. Like, do you have Vocal Line, which is like this industry standard plugin that you use to like put vocal stacks in time with each other? Um, and I was like, what's that? Like, what's Vocal Line? And in that moment, like, I know, like, I just realized I was like, I got like a lot to learn in terms of like what is actually used in the industry, and like in sessions that like I want to be in and stuff. And I remember like the dude that Marcus sort of introduced me to, which was like T-Boz's brother. His name was KO, which was his producer name. And big shout out to KO, because like he helped me out a lot too. Like, I learned a lot working with him. And basically, I just remember like at one point Marcus walked in the room just to be like, yo, like, how's this dude doing that like I introduced you to? And I just remember KO just being like, terrible, like from the back of the room. Like, he was just like, it's terrible, like this is going so bad. Like, I guess just because I didn't know what Vocal Line was, and I knew how to record, I knew how to like EQ, I knew the basics, but it's like in terms of like industry standard techniques, I was like a total novice. And so yeah, like they introduced me to Yanni, and Yanni sort of like put me on like all these techniques. Like he taught me about vocal line, he taught me about just vocal tracking in general, and like how to listen really closely, and like just have like such like a sharp ear in terms of like hearing things that most people probably wouldn't hear, and just teaching me like, like he would hook me up with like plugins. He was the plug, like Yanni was the plug, and eventually like I was working with Yanni for so long, and I had the chance to work with basically like the first big project I worked on was through Yanni, and it was, I just remember like we were just working with like all these songwriters, and he'd be like, "Yo, can you come through tonight?" And then one time, I guess he realized I was like getting good or getting to a certain level of proficiency, and he's like, "Can you come in and work tomorrow night or something?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, and I was like, "Who is it?" And he's like, "It's Maya." And I was like Maya, like I don't, and maybe like I don't know, people like watching this podcast like might not know who Maya is, but like when I was growing up, like in the like early 2000s, and like just before 2010, like Maya was like huge, like, and I always listened to her, and I always just like thought she had like such a cool like voice, and um obviously like very beautiful, and like anyway, like, and like Lady Marmalade, I think like wasn't, it was maybe like 10 years ago at that point, so, and she won a Grammy for that. And so it was just like such a weird like full circle thing, because I listened to a lot of TLC on the radio growing up. I listened to Maya, and it was just like to go, and then basically he's just like, "Yeah, it's Maya," and I was like Maya, and he's like, "Yes." I was like, "Okay," and I like tried to play it cool, because we were just texting, and so I just like didn't really react. But in my head, I was like, "Oh shit! Like this is like going places." And so I worked with Maya, and she was like, she was just such like a she was like maybe the best possible person that I could have worked with for like my first sort of big recording experience. Um, just because she was so gracious, like so humble, so nice. She taught me, like, a lot of people probably don't know this, but like Maya like records herself and like engineers herself. And, like, she can do it. It's just like a lot of people don't like engineering, and it's, if you can delegate someone like something like that to someone that's good, like you're gonna do it. So she taught me a lot about just like vocal stacks and like how to organize my sessions. She just had like an immense amount of patience, like just for like my skill level. And I was very fortunate to like work with her for like my first sort of big experience.
That's
And
cool.
so we did like a bunch of songs with her, and yeah, like, and then basically, so that, and then we actually ended up like, uh, once the songs came out, like, I think maybe the next year, we actually ended up getting nominated for a Grammy for like one of the uh, albums that we had done with her, which was just like another huge thing. So, um, but yeah, so, but I was still interning at this point. So I guess like when I was working with Yanni, I was like, um, I gotta like find a way to like start bringing in some income, because I could like my student, like the money I had like for school and for like my living expenses was like starting to kind of get low a little bit. And I was like, if I'm going to stay down here, like I'm going to have to start bringing in some income. So eventually, like Yanni had some connections at Atlantic Records, and he knew that they were looking for an engineer. And I remember it was like New Year's, I think, of 2015, and I was like, I was with my dad and like that side of the family in Florida, and Yanni was like, "Yo, you should like hit this dude up. Like they're looking for an engineer." And so I hit him up and I sent him my resume. They gave me an interview for like basically the day I got back from holidays. I went in for the interview, and basically my interview was with Gary, this dude Gary Leon, who was like an A&R at Atlantic at the time, and this legendary engineer named Paul Foley, who's worked with I mean, he worked with Michael Jackson, like enough said. Like, and this dude was like one of Michael Jackson's like favorite dudes to work with in the studio. So in terms of like an engineer, and Paul Foley himself is like sort of a pioneer in terms of like a lot of modern Pro Tools like recording techniques that a lot of people just use every day. Like he helped, at least from what I read, like he helped sort of originate a lot of these techniques. So legendary dude, but like super humble, and like just talking with him, you'd have no idea that he was who he was. But he was the owner of this studio that Atlantic was like, I guess, renting out at the time. And so my interview was with those two people, with Gary and with Paul, and I ended up getting the gig. And yeah, like from there, I ended up working with a lot of people, but I was still just through all of this, uh, I was just engineering, and like the reason I got into music was because I like making beats. Um, and actually, like I ended up placing the beat like when I was engineering at Atlantic. Like a lot of people don't know this, but a good way to get your beats placed is if you're engineering. Like artists, if you're working with an artist, eventually they'll ask the engineer. Like they're gonna run out of beats. They're gonna ask the engineer, "Hey, do you have any beats?" And that's basically what happened. This one day, I was working with this artist named Javon Doe, who he I don't think he's still signed, but at the time he was like a new signee, and he was looking, he was recording lots of dope stuff, and we were having like these super long studio sessions, like getting in at like 7 p.m. and not leaving the studio till like 5 a.m., 6 a.m., 7 a.m., 8 a.m. sometimes. And one day he came in, he just didn't have any beats. He was like, "Joe, you got any beats?" And I like literally the first one I played him, he was like, "That shit's dope." And so we like recorded a song over this beat. We did a couple others, but this one, the first one we did was like the one that he showed the A&Rs, and they ended up really liking it. And they ended up, because Javon was from Houston, so they wanted to get a feature on it. So they ended up getting Bun B, who's just like a Houston legend, like OG, like legendary rapper, and they got him on the song. So that was like my first kind of placement, but I guess it was sort of like my first taste of like how the industry can be in terms of like in terms of like taking advantage of like a new producer. And uh, so I think it was around this time I started realizing like, damn, the industry's tough. Um, and I guess eventually, like I was doing a lot of engineering, and I guess I just realized like I was getting tired of like spending all my creative energy on other people's music. And even though I basically got to like where I wanted to be in terms of like where I set out to be, I sort of like looked around and I was like, but this, like, I'm not really enjoying this. Like, this doesn't feel fulfilling, because as an engineer, like, you don't get credited really. You have to like scratch and claw for like everything you get as an engineer. And you get mistreated a lot of the time by the artists. Like, they just treat you as kind of like a robot a lot of the time. I mean, not every artist, but there is like sort of this culture in the industry, like respect the engineer is like a quote, because the engineer gets disrespected a lot, because it's like you're the person that's like responsible for having the session running. And a lot of the time, like, these artists and their entourages are like drunk, they're smoking weed, they're drinking lean, that kind of thing. And if something goes wrong, like, they look at you, they look at the engineer, even though like it might not be the engineer's fault. It's still like, well, fix it, figure it out. And
But
you
when
know
it
like
goes right, it's the producer's job.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. If something goes wrong, it's always the engineer's fault for sure. And basically, yeah, I got like worn down, just sort of spending all my creative energy on things that like, it wasn't my music that I was working on. I was working on other people's music, which was like amazing. I mean, I gained so many skills, so much experience through that. But I think after probably 5, 6 years of doing it, I realized like, um, this isn't really like what I want to do. And I started sort of questioning, like, the idea of like turning your passion into a profession. And, like, I was on a work visa down there, and basically I reached a point where like my work visa was about to expire, and I just sort of realized I wasn't like enjoying the music industry all that much anymore. And I realized like I was a lot happier, um, when I was just like making my own beats and like putting them out on SoundCloud and that kind of thing, and like building up my own little listener base. So I realized that like I need to get back to doing that, and that engineering's hard, and it's like, it's hard to get to a place where you're gonna like make a living for the rest of your life and make a good wage and have like a good work life balance. Like all of these things are kind of like taboo to even talk about in the LA music industry, but like especially like work life balance, it's like it's a very like I'll sleep when I'm dead kind of culture, you know.
Mm,
And so I just started like getting back. Like I ended up moving back to Canada, and basically I was like, well, how can I like fulfill and like scratch my musical itch, uh, even though I'm not in LA anymore, you know? And so I just started basically like picking up where I left off when I left Canada. You know, I just like started making my own beats again and started making like more well, I mean, the inspiration came from like when I would be leaving sessions in LA. Like I was always like these super loud like trap beats, like just like 808s, fucking super loud hi hats, just like grinding your ears off, you know. And so when I left the studio each night when I was driving home, I mean, I discovered lo-fi music, which is basically just like instrumental hip hop, like at its core, you know. And it was a lot of like the same type of shit I would listen to, like that inspired me to like start making beats, you know.
hmm.
So it sort of like rekindled my like original inspiration and motivation for making music and for getting involved in music in the first place, you know?
Yeah. Do you
And
think a lot of people end up kind of taking those detours on from their own creativity into supporting somebody else's creativity because they can earn a paycheck? Because that sounds like a kind of familiar story for a lot of creatives where they're like, I can't make any money doing my own thing, so I need to help somebody else build theirs because they can afford to pay me or whatever.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mean, even within the music industry, like it happens a lot. Like, there's a lot of songwriters that on their own, like they're amazing artists, but just like for whatever reason, like, like labels didn't want to sign them or like they didn't want to get that push. But like it always happens, like you'll get like a person in the studio that's like, hoping to be an artist. But then eventually, like the label's just like, well, we don't like you as an artist. We like you as a songwriter. And so I feel like that does happen a lot from that angle too. I don't know if you're like referring to like examples outside of the music industry as well, but like,
I think it applies pretty broadly from a lot of the
mm,
creatives that I've talked to. That's kind of the never ending struggle is like the starving artist trope, right? Like,
yeah,
how do you make an income doing your creative work? Did you find a big culture shift going from like a mid-sized Canadian town to LA?
a big culture shift. Yeah, I mean, I guess growing up, like I always just thought like the States was like Canada, but with like cooler fast food and cooler cereal and like, like cooler junk food and more of like what I was into culturally in terms of like music and sports. Like I've always been a really big basketball fan, and like basketball is big in Canada now, but like at the time it was like, when I was growing up, it was like hockey and baseball were basically like the things that you would see on the highlights. You'd have to wait till like the very end of the highlights to see like 2 minutes of basketball highlights, you know? So yeah, I always sort of viewed it with like very rose colored glasses, you know? Then once I moved down there, I realized that like it does have similarities, but it's also like hugely different just culturally, like in terms of like religion, uh, guns, um, and just like
Poli-
I would say like
Politics,
sorry,
obviously.
politics,
Politics.
yeah, and politics and like social awareness in general. Like, um, it's almost like talking about politics. Like if you're in Canada, like talking about politics is kind of, it's like a pretty normal thing to talk about. But in the States, it's like everyone's like, oh, like this guy's talking about politics. Like it's almost a taboo thing. So yeah, like I think I did notice a big difference. And also like there's like a difference in like the way that people are friendly too. Like in Canada, like I feel like people are friendly, but they're like way more reserved in how friendly they are, you know? I guess depending on where you go, it's like a reserved friendliness, you know. But in where I was in California, and I think this is like fairly common throughout the states, is like, I mean, unless you're in like Utah or something, but I don't know. I've never been to Utah, so maybe it's like that there too. But like people just like are a lot more like outwardly just outgoing, you know. So from that angle, it was like super easy to make friends. It was I found it a lot easier. I will say I found it a lot easier to make friends in Los Angeles than I'd ever have in Toronto.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I would say there was some unanticipated culture differences. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Have any of the ups and downs you faced through your time at like major labels, going back to doing your own thing like you did originally, has that changed your perspective on life or shifted your priorities? Or was that realization what made you shift your priorities?
Yeah, dealing with major labels, I guess it's sort of yeah. Like I realized, I think one of the big realizations I had was like I'm engineering. I need to like transfer into making beats, and I was making beats. I was like making beats in this. Like I started learning how to make trap beats, and actually like working with Yanni, like I learned how to make my mixes sound a lot louder and basically just like industry standard, you know. Um, but I was going away from like what I was originally inspired to make in turn and just like more fit the industry, you know. But then I realized like when I started doing that, I was like even working with labels, like you still it's a lot of compromise, you know. Like you can make a beat and feel like super proud of it, but then you give it to like an A&R and they're like, like you should change this and you should change that. And I don't know, like not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just like for me, I found that really kind of like stifling in terms of my inspiration, you know?
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, like I guess I sort of realized that like mm, turning your passion into a career isn't always the dream. Isn't always the ideal scenario that it's sort of made out to be in general society, you know?
Hmm. Say
Um,
more about that.
well, just because like um, when you're doing it just as like a passion, you know, it's like you're just doing it as a release. You're doing it as like something that you enjoy doing. It's like a pastime. It's something that you do because like you love it intrinsically, you know. But eventually, it got to a point, and I thought like even though I was just engineering in the states, like in the music industry, that I was like, well, as long as I'm working on music, doing something in audio, like I'm cool. But eventually I just sort of realized like sort of harkening back to like what I was saying before is like a lot of my creative energy was being spent on working on other people's stuff, so that like even in my spare time I was kind of like not as inspired. And also like the experience of like working with record labels and seeing just how they operate, like it was a little bit disheartening, you know. um and like not trying to take anything away from like people that work and succeed in the music industry, like with how it is. I mean, like more power to them. It's just like for me, it was just um, it wasn't my thing, you know. And so yeah, I would say that like eventually I just sort of realized like maybe I should go back to Canada and like and maybe not have to depend on music so much for income, you know, like not be living check to check. And like I can reserve my creative passion, my creative energy for um, things that I like really actually want to work on. And that was like lo-fi music and like more just kind of classic sounding like hip hop beats and um, just doing it just to do it. And so yeah, like I would say like my priority shifted just in terms of like maybe this isn't necessarily like if I could do what I'm doing now, like just making lo-fi beats and like what I really like to make, music I'm like passionate about, like that it's like creative, is not trying to fit a certain mold or a certain sound, like just for the sake of fitting it and just like for mass appeal, um, then yeah, that'd be great, you know. But like if I go the rest of my life without like making a quote unquote living off of my music and I just like I'm making what I want to make just because I like making it, I guess I realized that's the happy medium for me there. And I stress like for me, like I don't want like if anyone's watching this to think like music, like fuck the music industry, although like a little bit fuck the music industry, but like if you make it in the industry, like I'm not hating on you. And I realize that like my experience is not the same as everybody's experience, and there are a lot of like really dope people that go down there and make it and carve out a career. And like more power to them, like not hating on them at all. I just realized it wasn't my path, you know.
You do hear a lot of independent hip hop artists talking shit about the music industry, though. Generally,
Oh,
even the big ones.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But no, yeah, I mean, the music industry is, it's tough. And one of the biggest things about it is like there's no, like compared to like something like the film industry, like there's no employment standards. Like there's no, you don't get paid for overtime. I mean, unless you get into like a really good situation, but that's like the exception and not the norm, you know? There's no
Hmm.
employment standards. There's no like, you don't get lunch breaks. You don't get, uh, you don't get like a lunch stipend. You don't get like catered stuff. I mean, maybe working with certain artists, you would. I mean, I did end up working with Diddy when I was in LA, and like that was a lot more sort of luxurious, I guess. But it was like a lot of things came along with that as well. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I don't know if
I
I
wonder if
got
I
off
wonder if a
track
lot
there,
about
but
yeah, no, that's cool. I wonder if because you kind of hear it both ways. People are like, "Oh, do what you love for work," right? But then if
mm,
you do what you love as a job, it still becomes work at some point, right?
exactly, yeah, and
So
like
I don't know. I could see.
those pathways in your brain kind of start crossing, and it's like, am I doing this because I love it, or am I doing this like to get a check, like to make, like feed, like put food in my mouth,
Yeah,
Um,
100%, which everybody needs to do.
totally.
Um, do you? What's your relationship like to productivity? Because you always hear creatives. A common struggle is around productivity. How do you manage like staying productive? Do you have any like processes or practices in your life that help you sort of stay on track when you're in the flow?
Um, I think it's a lot like getting to the gym. Like I would liken it to being in the gym a little bit, like in some aspects, in that like the hardest part of going to the gym is going to the gym. Like once you're there, it's like it's a lot easier to like pick up the weights and start doing your routine and stuff. But it's like the hardest thing is to like get out of bed and get to the gym. So I think like a lot of the time the hardest part about staying productive is like just getting into the studio and just like starting working.
Hmm.
um and I think it's like it's really common to like let perfection be the enemy of good, so to speak. I was actually just listening to like a podcast today that was basically just saying like ambition trumps talent every time. And I think that's totally true because a lot of people that are like quote unquote talented, like they're trying to make like the perfect thing, and if it's not perfect, they don't want to make it. They don't want to be associated with it. But it's like there's a lot more to be said for just like consistency and being productive. And it's almost like, especially in like the streaming landscape these days, it's like you have to stay consistent in order to like maintain your listener base. And yeah, and I think it's just like falling in love with the process, instead of like the result. And I think like you and I have discussed that at length, and I think that was like a big sort of light bulb moment for me, in that like you just gotta not be so attached to the result. And if make whatever. And a lot of the time, it's like one thing I realized today is that like even if you are striving for perfection, like you don't even know if that perfection is perfect in someone else's eyes. So like what might be perfect for you might be like to someone else like, oh well, I like this one that you spent 5 minutes on more. So it's like, you know what I'm saying? So it's like even if you're
Yeah.
striving for perfection, like it's like that's totally subjective. I mean, in a lot of respects. So um yeah, I think just falling in love with the process and not being attached to the results. And um yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. Absolutely. And
That's tough in our time of TikTok culture and 5-second videos and virality and all the other shit. It's like same thing for me, right? Is just it's going to be outlasting the other. I think it's like 99% of podcasts don't make it past episode 20. So I heard a
mhm,
really cool stat that was really encouraging the other day. 90% of podcasters don't make it to episode 5. Of the
mhm.
remaining 10%, 90% of them don't make it past episode 20. So if you
Yeah.
make 21 podcasts, you're in like the top 1% of all
Yeah.
podcasters ever. And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Well,
Well,
there you
that
go.
seems like a pretty low bar to clear.
True. True. But you might find the bars a little higher than you anticipated once you move on, you know what I mean? Like, but yeah, I mean, it's if you're doing something creative, like you really just have to do it because you're loving it and not for any other reason, and that makes it a lot easier to stay consistent. And
If you can
um,
alleviate the pressure on your creativity, then you're free, right?
yeah, yeah,
But
exactly.
I guess that's balancing this, how do I make a living and do what I love? And I think that there's some it's a that's a creative process within itself. Because I think a
Yeah,
lot of people in our culture right now are trying to redefine what work like looks like for them. And the possibilities are so much different than they've ever been before with the whole creator economy, gig economy, freelancing, all that kind of stuff has just opened up a world of possibilities to people. So you don't have to put as much pressure on your creative process and end up conforming to some industry norm, as you said, right?
right.
Whether it's, I mean, pick any creative endeavor, there's like a mainstream way that you can go with that. But if you
Hmm.
can find a way to support yourself that takes the pressure off your art, it's
Yeah,
pretty empowering. Like I've watched that with my wife, right? She's an actress. She quit acting for a year, and in that year, she stopped caring about the outcome of her work, and her work just like actually got better by her doing nothing other than being disconnected from the outcome.
right. Yeah, I mean, it's like I don't know. I mean, you and I played a lot of basketball growing up. It's like the more, and if you're shooting a free throw, like the more you think about it, the more likely you are to miss. You know what I mean? If you just sort of do it and like rely on your muscle memory, like it's the same sort of thing with like being creative. Like the more you like overthink it, like the more rigid and just like not representative of like what you can do as a true creative it becomes. You know what I mean? So yeah, a lot of it is just about not thinking too hard. And yeah, there's a lot of things in like the musical process individually that like I've just learned to like not think so hard. Like, do you like it? Do you love it? Then use it. Are you like not sure about it? Then don't use it. Don't try to like convince yourself that like what you're doing is good. Like it, like it. Like you've listened to enough music at this point. Like you know, so a lot of it is just like not second guessing yourself a lot and trusting the process, so to speak. I mean, I know that's a little bit of a cliche these days, but it rings true.
It holds true.
Yeah.
What about where does inspiration factor into this? Like, are you at a place in your music making that you can just be like, okay, I'm going to sit down and make a beat, and just like once you start working, you kind of find that flow state because you built up your skill set, or do you still have to wait for a whim of inspiration, so to speak?
I think it's both, but I think it's a mistake to always be waiting on inspiration. I think it's like there's a psychological concept where like uh the intuitive way of thinking about it is that uh behavior follows attitude. So like you got to wait till like you're in the right mindset to like do the thing that you're wanting to do. But the reality of it is, and studies show that like uh, attitude follows behavior. So I guess the way that this relates to music is that like you can wait for those moments, like those magical moments where you just get that melody in your head and you're like, that's it, like I gotta go, and you hear the whole beat and you go and see, you just like sit down and make it. And for me, like I know that every creative's process is different, and so like that's just how it works for me. Like there are times there have been beats that I made where it's like I just hear something in my head, or like I hear something in a dream and then I wake up and I can remember it well enough to like turn it into something real.
Hmm.
But I would say like 95% of the time my creative expression comes from like just sitting down and just fucking around and tinkering and just trying different things and just finding something that like finding a groove that inspires you, and then before you know it the beat's done. So I would say like it's definitely a mistake from my point of view. I don't know if this applies to everybody, but from my point of view, it's always a mistake to like wait for that moment where I'm like feeling super inspired, because if you just sit down and you start working, you start putting sounds together, that can that can create and spark inspiration in itself.
Yeah, well, like you said, I think it rings true for anything you do, is that getting started is the hardest part. As
Yeah,
soon as you move into that, even just setting the intention and sitting down to do the work, like if you get started, something will come of it. Whether you
yeah,
end up using it or not, it's like at least you're
exactly,
building that muscle and that habit.
exactly.
Um, Yeah, no, I imagine that my hypothesis, not being like a creative in the traditional sense, is that the folks that wait for inspiration to create their work probably don't produce a lot of work, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know, like I look at artists like, Keith Haring is a big inspiration of mine. And like most of the best artists are like extremely prolific. And I think there have been studies too that show that like basically like your and I don't know how robust the study is. I would be actually be interested, like it was years ago I read this, but and I should go back and read it just to like make sure the research methods are cool or whatever. But basically, like what they found was that um, the more you make, the more like per capita, like your percentage of usable material goes up. So let's say you make like 10 beats in a year, like I mean, God forbid, I mean that's I don't know, that would be like a low amount of productivity for me, the chances are like one of those beats is going to be good, or maybe five, but if you make, so that's like approximately half of what you make is going to be good, right? But the more you make, like say you go from like 10 to like 200, then like I think that the chances of like your usable material going up from like half it to like maybe somewhere near like 60-70%, that happens like the more you make, and I think that's just like practice,
That's cool.
like
Yeah, you're putting in
yeah,
reps and like honing your craft and refining your process. And
right.
I think that applies to a lot of things, actually, not even just creatives, but
I'm sure, yeah,
yeah,
the more the
that's
merrier.
cool. Yeah, for sure. Interesting.
Mhm.
Looking back on all the experiences that you've been through, um, is there any advice that you would give to somebody that's just heading into the music industry or wants to get started? Like maybe that was in a similar position to you. Is there anything you would have done differently or any lessons learned that you think would be valuable for others to hear?
um I would say it's very important to maintain a balance in your life. I think I reached a point in my music career when I was living in LA that I was just like, it was all work, no play. I would basically have a session, like 12 to 14-hour session. I mean, like, I don't know, maybe I'm probably exaggerating a bit, but there were a lot of 14-hour sessions, but like I would just be going, and then I'd just be so exhausted when I got home that I would just crash out. And it would just be this cycle of like going to work, engineering, recording, coming home exhausted, fall asleep. I wake up at like 2 p.m. the next day and I got like 3 hours to get ready for the next session, And so it's like my life fell out of balance. And all I was doing was something that like wasn't really inspiring for me, And I wasn't like making the effort to have a balance in my life. I wasn't like, I had friends, but I wasn't seeing my friends. I um I knew I should be exercising, but I didn't do it. Like I didn't go to the gym or anything. And I think if I could go back and do it again, like I would make sure to like keep more of a balance in my life, because like life brings inspiration, and taking a break away from like your creative pursuits, it also brings inspiration. It gives you like perspective. Um, so I think that's a big thing, is like maintaining balance in your life. Like don't forget about the other important things, like a healthy diet, see your friends and get exercise. That's a big one. Um,
What is that? What balance looks like for you now? More social time, more physical exercise, eating
yeah,
well. Do you have any
yeah.
other
I mean,
practices? Like, yeah,
yeah. Like, I mean, I make more of an effort to exercise every day than I ever have. I think that works like strongly in my favor. Um, like I cook, and if I don't cook, like I try to always make like at least like more healthy choices. When I was just engineering, like it was just work and sleep basically. Like I would just be like stopping at a fast food restaurant on the way home and like eating a burger, and it was kind of a vicious cycle, So yeah, I would say like now I'm eating a lot better. I'm exercising. I have like, I don't know. I have like a day job, I guess, so to speak, that makes me inspired to like take that break and be able to work on something creatively. Um, so I think I would say that's what it looks like for me, just having a more balanced life. Because if you're just trying to be
exercise.
like, yeah, if you're just trying to like
Ex-
be creative all the time, you can like you can get burnt out, you know, like you kind of you can yeah, burn yourself out.
It's like with anything, man. It was like
Yeah.
me coming out of, 8 years, 9 years of like just hard charging enterprise sales. Like I was
Mhm.
so fried coming
Totally.
out the tail end of that. And same as you, I've made exercise like a massive priority. And it's such a good foundational thing to do in your life. I mean, obviously, it improves your physical abilities and your physical resilience, but it's so good for your mental health and your sleep and just everything. And for me, it's like I find if I work myself down, I'm less reactive as well. When you're a little physically tired, it's like
Totally.
the trivial things that happen in life that normally cause friction are so much easier to deal with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and meditation as well, I think is another thing we should throw in there because like I feel like just in the last like maybe year really like I've started meditating regularly and I feel like that even just like 10 minutes a day it makes a profound difference in my life. So
What have those differences looked like for you?
I would say yeah, like going back to what you're saying about like being reactive. I like struggle with like anxiety and depression at times and like I think just that, you know, as much as those things can like sort of stifle the way you want to live your life and the things that you want to achieve, like I think that meditation can help with those things and sort of keep you on like a more even keel. And it just allows you to just sort of have perspective on things and just not be as reactive to things in life. And um, yeah, I think it just keeps you more steady and um, you know less likely to freak out about certain things and just sort of being present and um, just like accepting things as they come, you know, instead of like being reacting to everything and like and sort of feeling like everything like triggers your defense mechanisms and your fight or flight, you know.
A little bit more, this thing is happening rather than this thing is happening to me.
Yeah, 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 exactly.
Right. Yeah. I've really put a huge emphasis on, so I've been meditating off and on for a really long time, and I made it a huge priority over the last couple of months. And um my mom passed recently, and I gained a lot of perspective through that whole journey,
Mm-hmm.
and realized, just became aware of some thought patterns that don't serve me, and I've been doing a lot of work to try and reprogram those through meditative practice. And
Yeah.
yeah, man, it has a huge impact. Like, I'm most days I'm doing like 35 minutes in the morning first thing and 35 minutes at night right before I go to bed.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I just need more. Like, maybe I'm a little thick-headed and it's taking me a little longer to reprogram these things than I would like, but
Mm-hmm.
it has a profound difference. And even from an interesting data perspective, and this is kind of nerdy, but I have an Aura ring that does a lot of the sleep tracking stuff.
Okay.
My heart rate variability is greatly improved while I sleep when I meditate before bed. I typically get more deep sleep when I meditate right before bed,
Wow.
and my resting heart rate is slightly lower throughout the night.
Okay.
It's, yeah, so like the physiological effects that I can actually measure on the days that I do versus the days that I don't. It's like, okay, never mind the awareness and the presence and being able to, over time, you start to be able to choose your response in
Yeah.
these moments that you would normally be reactive, and you catch yourself. It's like, fuck, man, that feels like such a big win. Even those
Yeah.
little moments where you're like, oh, nope, not going to get me this time. It's,
Totally.
yeah, it's incredible the impact that it can have. Like, even like you said, a very small amount of meditation and some physical exercise, I think, would get a lot of people much closer to the lives
Yeah,
that they're looking to live, for
I
sure.
agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
And with meditation is not even that much of a commitment. Like I do 10 minutes in the morning. Like lately I've been trying a bit more with like 20 minutes, you know, but um definitely like a couple of days go by and I don't meditate, I notice that like my responses get a lot less controllable. I have noticed like my heart rate, you know, like when just you saying that, I have noticed that like before I meditated, like something would happen, like just regular life shit, and like I would be like all of a sudden I'd be like anxious, my heart would be going, I'd be like breaking out in like a sweat, you know. Um, yeah, I just feel like it allows you to handle life a lot. easier, you know? So
Hmm.
yeah,
Just
man,
taking some time
very,
to connect with their breath too, right?
yeah. Hmm.
Most people
Totally.
don't have any awareness of their breath, and even just doing
Exactly.
something as simple as thinking about breathing in when you're breathing in and thinking about breathing out when you're breathing out can be a wildly powerful practice, and it's so simple.
Totally. And just, or just being like conscious of like, I'm feeling this way. What's my breathing like? You know, and usually those things are linked, you know, like if you're feeling super anxious, you're feeling like the world's closing in on you. Usually you're taking like little tiny breaths, you know? And then if you, like the second that you, maybe not the second, but like very soon after you like just start taking like full breaths, like the difference is like, it's huge. So
Yeah,
yeah,
you get to
fully
control your
agree.
physiology a little bit at least. Yeah,
Right. And just, yeah, just becoming in tune with it and not being such a victim to it, and like realizing that you have control, you know. You can check your breathing, and normally that, yeah,
yeah.
it
You learn
it's
to
tied to
control
a
your
lot of
reactions
things.
to life. Yeah, totally, man. And I think this is something that a lot of us suffer from culturally, especially in North America, where everybody seems so fucking entitled. Is oh, like life, why is life doing this to me? And it's like the shit's just happening, you know?
Yeah.
And if you had something I'm working towards actively, so I'm not saying that I'm free of this, but being able to choose your response,
Hmm.
how you respond to circumstances just gives you so much more personal power.
Totally.
Super interesting.
Yeah.
So what's next for you, man? What are you planning for the future? What are you working on?
Like just always making beats. I've got a few things happening with the collaborator that I work with. His name's Brandon Lee Searly. So we have a few tracks coming out. I have a few solo tracks coming out. I took a little bit of like a creative break, I think, with the holidays. I think that's the other thing too, is like once you reach a creative flow, is like figuring out how to keep that going, like when certain things in life happen, like the holidays, that kind of thing. So that, just through the holidays, I sort of, uh, I don't know, was just focusing on other things for a bit. I wasn't being as consistent with music, and so I'm getting back to that. And yeah, I mean, I think this year, like I guess I've realized that like a lot of about the lo-fi hip hop landscape is like something called passive listening, where you're on these playlists, you know, and like people just like throw the playlist on in the background, and they're just kind of listening to it, and that will get you plays, but just being on those playlists, but it doesn't lead to like a fan base, because people aren't like aware of like they're listening to you. They're not like, oh, I'm gonna go listen to JetFuelJayy, like this song, you know. So I think the way to get around that is to like just start making more content and showing like my process.
Okay, sorry, my yeah, my internet completely crapped out. You're talking
All
about
good.
passive listening versus like active listening.
Yeah, so like passive listening, like especially with lo-fi, it's like it's considered to be like background music by a lot of people, you know, like you don't like people don't really like put on lo-fi and like listen to it intently. I mean, I'm sure people do, but the culture around it is that it's just kind of like lo-fi chill, like study music, you know. So you get on these playlists and you're like one of like 400 people on these playlists, you know. And so if your music gets played, it's like just by a shuffle, and they're just listening to like the playlist. They're not like aware of like who they're listening to or like what the song title is, you know. So I think the way to get around that is to like start making content, start like showing people your process and getting people in tune with like who you are as an artist, and um, just building from there. I think that's like the next step for me, big time.
Cool. What does that look like? Do you have any ideas?
Yeah, just showing my process. Like I just want to start, you know, be like recording my sessions, and just showing people how to do certain things, maybe like showing people like which plugins I like to use and why and how I use them. Little tricks that like I've discovered that other people might find valuable. um, I also am like a visual artist, so like I would like to sort of find ways to integrate that too into my content as well. um, yeah, but I think in this day and age, like if unless you're like on a big label as a big artist and you got people doing this stuff for you, like you need to be creating content to like direct traffic towards your music, you know? So
That's
that's
cool.
sort of the big next step for me. Yeah.
Lifting the hood, so to speak, and maybe sharing some tips and tricks with some up and comers that maybe don't have the opportunity to work with folks like Yanni and be at
Yeah,
Atlantic
yeah,
and have gone down the journey
exactly.
that you've gone down. Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Cool.
And just showing people me, you know? Like I don't want to just be like a faceless person. Uh and yeah, I think yeah, just letting people into my world a little bit more, you know.
Yeah. I like that. Cool, man. If people want to check you out, where should they go?
You can find me on Spotify. I'm at JetFuelJayy, JetFueljayy, J with two Y's. That's for the algorithms.
Yeah.
And let's see what else. Like you can find me on Instagram. I'm JetFuelJayy everywhere. So my name, if you look me up on any platform, I'm there. Instagram is like probably where I'm most active on at this time. Um, but yeah, check me out anywhere on social media.
Cool, man. Well, look forward to seeing some of your YouTube stuff come out, and yeah, all the best in the future, man. Thanks for coming in and having a chat today.
Of course, man. Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for having me.